My name is Brittany, and I am 34 years old. I worked my entire life to become a successful real estate investor, climbing up from absolutely nothing. When my parents struggled financially, I bought them a beautiful house as a gesture of love. Then I discovered something that broke my heart. They held a housewarming party and deliberately didn't invite me. Yes, they celebrated their new home without including the person who purchased it for them. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how I handled being excluded from a party in a house I paid for. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, my childhood was defined by financial struggle. My parents, Thomas and Linda, were hardworking people who constantly juggled multiple jobs, but somehow always remained in debt. Dad worked as a delivery driver during the day and a security guard on weekends while Mom cleaned houses and worked retail. Despite their efforts, bill collectors called regularly, and I became accustomed to the electricity being shut off at least once every winter. What made our situation particularly difficult was my parents' preoccupation with keeping up appearances. They refused to acknowledge our financial reality to friends and family. They would scrimp on necessities for weeks to throw elaborate birthday parties or buy status symbols they couldn't afford. I remember one Christmas when they bought me an expensive gaming console that was popular that year, only to sell it 3 months later to pay the heating bill. By 16, I was working after school at a local grocery store. I understood early on that if I wanted financial security, I would need to create it myself. My parents never discouraged me from working, but they also never taught me about saving or investing. When I received my first paycheck, Dad immediately asked if I could contribute to the household by paying the overdue cable bill. Despite these challenges, I excelled academically and secured a partial scholarship to Portland State University. I worked full-time while studying business with a focus on real estate. My parents attended my graduation but complained about the parking cost and left early to avoid paying for dinner with my friends. After college, I started as an administrative assistant at a real estate investment firm. I absorbed everything I could about the business, stayed late studying contracts, and volunteered for every opportunity. Within 5 years, I had saved enough to purchase my first investment property, a small fixer-upper that I renovated myself on weekends. That first successful flip launched my career. By the time I turned 30, I had my own small but profitable real estate investment company with 4 employees. Meanwhile, my parents continued their cycle of financial instability. Dad had developed back problems that limited his work options, and Mom had been laid off from her long-term retail job when the store closed. Throughout my 20s, I helped them whenever I could. I paid off their car loan, covered medical bills, and once bailed them out when they faced eviction. But a pattern emerged that I tried to ignore. Whenever I helped them financially, they would show brief gratitude, followed by expectations for more. When I bought them a used car after their old one died, they complained it wasn't the model they would have chosen. When I paid for Mom's dental work, she questioned why I didn't also cover Dad's even though he hadn't asked, and I would have if he had. They would proudly tell their friends about my success, but would add qualifiers like, "She works too much," or "She's lucky she doesn't have children to worry about." My relationship with them was complicated. I loved them deeply and recognized their struggles weren't entirely their fault. They grew up in families without financial education and faced economic challenges throughout their lives. But as my therapist would later point out, understanding the reasons for their behavior didn't mean I had to enable it. By my early 30s, I had created a comfortable life for myself. I owned a modest apartment in a nice area of Portland and was saving for my dream home. I dated occasionally, but focused primarily on growing my business. Then I met James, a structural engineer I collaborated with on a renovation project. He was kind-grounded and understood my drive. After 6 months of dating, our relationship had become serious and supportive. Around this time, my parents faced another crisis. The owner of their rented duplex decided to sell, giving them 60 days to vacate. At 59 and 61, with poor credit and limited income, finding a new rental would be nearly impossible in Portland's competitive housing market. As they panicked about potentially becoming homeless, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to buy them a house. The idea came to me during a sleepless night. I had the means to help my parents in a significant way to give them security in their later years. Despite our complicated history, the thought of them struggling to find housing in their 60s broke my heart. The next morning, I called my financial advisor to discuss the feasibility of purchasing a property for them. "It's doable," she said, "but it will delay your own home purchase by at least 3 years." I accepted this reality. My dream house could wait. My parents' housing crisis couldn't. I decided to keep the property in my name for tax purposes and to protect them from potential creditors, but they would live there rent-free. In my mind, this arrangement would provide them security while maintaining appropriate boundaries. The house hunting process was both exciting and stressful. I wanted to find something they would love that also represented a solid investment. After viewing 11 properties, I found a charming 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a respectable neighborhood. It needed some updates but had good bones and a lovely backyard where Mom could garden. At $385,000, it was at the top end of my budget, but the area was appreciating steadily. I negotiated the price down to $370,000 and closed within 30 days, all without telling my parents. I planned an elaborate surprise, telling them I wanted to show them an investment property and get their opinion. On a sunny Saturday in April, I picked them up and drove to the house, a small gift box with the keys sitting on the dashboard. As we pulled into the driveway, Mom admired the flowering cherry tree in the front yard. "This neighborhood is too nice for your typical rentals," Dad commented, always ready to offer his opinion on my business decisions. I parked and handed Mom the small box. "Before we go inside, I have something for you." She opened it, confusion crossing her face as she held up the keys. "What are these for?" "They're yours," I said, emotion catching in my throat. "This isn't just another investment property. This is your new home." The moment of realization was everything I'd hoped for. Mom gasped and covered her mouth, tears immediately filling her eyes. Dad, rarely emotional, sat stunned before asking if I was serious. "Completely serious," I confirmed. "You'll never have to worry about rent or a landlord selling out from under you again." What followed was a flurry of tears, hugs, and expressions of disbelief. Mom kept saying she couldn't accept such a gift while Dad walked around the exterior of the house as if in a daze. I explained the arrangement carefully. "The house will remain in my name for tax and legal reasons, but it's your home to live in for as long as you want. No rent, just cover the utilities and regular maintenance." They nodded in agreement, seemingly understanding the responsibility that came with the gift. We spent the afternoon touring the house with Mom already planning where furniture would go and Dad inspecting the water heater and furnace with newfound proprietary interest. "We'll take good care of it, Brittany," Mom promised, squeezing my hand. "This is more than we ever could have dreamed of." In the following weeks, I arranged for some renovations before they moved in. The kitchen needed updating, the master bathroom required a walk-in shower for Dad's safety, and new carpeting throughout would freshen the space. I consulted them on every decision, wanting them to feel the home was truly theirs. This was when the first subtle warning signs appeared. What started as input quickly evolved into demands. The standard carpet I'd selected wasn't suitable. They preferred something more plush and significantly more expensive. The white subway tile backsplash I'd chosen for the kitchen was too plain. They wanted handcrafted artisan tiles they'd seen in a home magazine. "This seems excessive," James commented one evening as I showed him the growing list of upgrade requests. "They do realize this is already an incredibly generous gift, right?" I defended them, explaining they were just excited and wanted their forever home to be perfect. I agreed to some upgrades while gently holding firm on others, framing budget limitations as investment considerations rather than unwillingness to fulfill their wishes. When the renovations were complete, we did a final walkthrough together. The house looked beautiful with almost everything customized to their preferences. Mom cried again as she walked through the updated kitchen with new quartz countertops and stainless appliances. Dad seemed particularly pleased with the converted garage space now set up as a hobby room where he could work on his model trains. "It's perfect," Mom said, hugging me tightly. "I still can't believe this is ours." "It's everything we could have wanted," Dad agreed, his usual stoicism softened by genuine appreciation. They moved in the following weekend with James and me helping transport their belongings from the old duplex. As we arranged furniture and unpacked boxes, there was a palpable sense of excitement and new beginnings. For once, I felt like I had done something unequivocally right for my parents, something that couldn't be misinterpreted or diminished. Before we left that evening, Mom pressed a house key into my palm. "You always have a place here," she said warmly. "This is your home too." I drove away that night with a light heart, genuinely believing I had finally found a way to help my parents that would strengthen rather than complicate our relationship. In retrospect, I should have paid more attention to how quickly they began referring to it as our house, rather than acknowledging my role in providing it. After my parents moved into their new home, I became consumed with a major redevelopment project that had been in the planning stages for months. My company had acquired an old warehouse to convert into mixed-use retail and residential spaces, and the construction phase was finally beginning. 14-hour days became my norm, and communication with my parents dwindled to occasional text messages and brief Sunday phone calls. About a month after they settled in, I was having coffee with Sarah, a family friend who had known us since I was a child. She mentioned visiting my parents and casually said, "Their housewarming party was wonderful. The house looks amazing with all the work you put into it." I froze mid-sip. Housewarming party? Sarah's expression shifted to discomfort as she realized I didn't know about it. "Oh, I assumed you were there. They had about 30 people over last weekend. They gave everyone tours and served this elaborate spread." A knot formed in my stomach. "They didn't mention any party to me." Sarah backpedaled, clearly sensing the tension. "Maybe they meant to surprise you or thought you were too busy with your project." I nodded, not wanting to make her more uncomfortable, but internally, I was reeling. Why would my parents host a celebration for their new home without including the person who made it possible? After Sarah left, I checked social media and found dozens of photos from the event. There was Mom proudly showing off the kitchen to her sisters, Dad grilling on the new patio set I'd purchased as a move-in gift, and groups of friends and family gathered throughout the home I had bought. In one particularly painful image, my father stood in the living room with his arm extended dramatically, saying something that made everyone laugh. The caption under the photo posted by my cousin read, "Uncle Thomas showing off their beautiful new home, #blessed, #new chapter." I scrolled through every photo feeling increasingly hurt and confused. Not only had they excluded me, but from the captions and comments it appeared they were presenting the house as their own achievement. Multiple comments congratulated them on their new purchase, or asked how they found such a perfect place. Nowhere was there any mention of my involvement. With shaking hands, I called my mother. She answered cheerfully, and I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I just saw pictures of a housewarming party you had." There was a pause before she responded casually, "Oh yes, we had a few people over to see the place." "A few people?" "There were at least 30 guests in the photos. Why wasn't I invited?" Her tone grew defensive. "We didn't think you'd be interested. You've been so busy with your project. Besides, it was mostly our friends, people you don't really know." "People I don't know. I saw Aunt Judy, Uncle Rick. Cousin Melissa and Sarah was there. These are people I've known my entire life." "Brittany, I don't understand why you're upset. It was just a casual gathering that came together last minute." The photos showing elaborate decorations and catered food contradicted this claim, but I took a deep breath, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Mom, that house is as much a part of my life as it is yours. I invested not just money but time and heart into creating a home for you. It hurts to be excluded from celebrating that." "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "We've been very appreciative of your help. I don't see why we need to invite you to every little gathering we have." The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with her saying she needed to go because Dad needs the phone. They both had cell phones, so this excuse was particularly transparent. Over the next week, I tried several times to arrange a visit to see how they were settling in. Each attempt was met with an excuse they were going to be out. They had plans with friends. The house was too messy for visitors. These deflections only increased my suspicion that something was wrong. During a dinner date with James, I expressed my growing concerns. "It doesn't make sense," I said, pushing food around my plate without eating. "They were so happy and grateful when I gave them the house. Now they're acting like they want nothing to do with me." James reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Have you considered just showing up unannounced? It's technically your house. You have every right to visit. The suggestion made me uncomfortable. That feels invasive. I want to respect their privacy and autonomy. I understand that, he said gently, but something isn't adding up. They've excluded you from a significant celebration. They're avoiding your visits, and from what you've seen online, they're misrepresenting how they acquired the house. These are red flags, Brittany. I knew he was right, but struggled with the implications. What if my parents were embarrassed about receiving such significant help? What if they were trying to save face with friends by pretending the house was their own achievement? While these possibilities hurt, they seemed more acceptable than the alternative that my parents were deliberately undermining my generosity for their own ego. After another week of deflected visit attempts, I made a decision. Sunday afternoons had always been family time when I was growing up. If there was ever an appropriate time to drop by unannounced, it would be then. I texted them that morning saying I might stop by later if I finished work early, deliberately making it sound uncertain. Mom responded with a vague, "We might be out call first," which I acknowledged but didn't promise to follow. At 2 o'clock that Sunday, I drove to their house anxiety building with each mile. As I turned onto their street, I noticed several cars parked outside their home. They clearly had company again despite claiming they might be out. Rather than deterring me, this strengthened my resolve. It was time to understand what was really happening. I parked my car across the street, noticing the curtains were open and people were visible moving about inside. Through the large front window, I could see a group of adults in the living room, glasses in hand, engaged in animated conversation. My parents were hosting yet another gathering they hadn't included me in. For several minutes, I sat in my car debating whether to leave or proceed. The uncertainty was paralyzingly. Part of me wanted to drive away and preserve the illusion that there was an innocent explanation for all of this. But the stronger part needed answers, needed to face whatever truth awaited me inside. With a deep breath, I grabbed the small housewarming gift I'd brought, a potted orchid, and walked up the path to the front door. I still had the key Mom had given me, but using it felt wrong under the circumstances. Instead, I rang the doorbell and waited, heart pounding. The door swung open to reveal my father, whose expression transformed from welcoming host to shock when he saw me. "Brittany," he said, my name sounding almost like an accusation. "What are you doing here?" I held up the orchid with a forced smile. "I finished work early and thought I'd stop by like I mentioned. Looks like you have company." He hesitated before stepping aside reluctantly. "Yes, just a few neighbors. Come in, I guess." The "I guess" stung more than it should have. I entered the foyer to find 4 couples in the living room, all conversation halting as I appeared. Mom emerged from the kitchen, a platter of appetizers in hand, freezing when she saw me. "Everyone," Dad announced awkwardly, "this is our daughter Brittany." One of the women, a stylish woman in her 50s, smiled brightly. "Oh, the successful real estate investor you've told us about. How wonderful to meet you." I nodded politely, noticing that my mother looked distinctly uncomfortable. The atmosphere had shifted from relaxed to tense in seconds. "I was just telling Frank and Diane about the renovation process." Dad continued, gesturing to an older couple seated on the sofa. "They're thinking of updating their kitchen, too." "The renovation was quite an undertaking," I said, seeing an opening to clarify my role. "I worked closely with the contractors to make sure everything was perfect for Mom and Dad." Dad quickly interjected. "Yes, Brittany gave us some advice during the process. She works in real estate." "Some advice?" I stared at him, stunned by the deliberate minimization of my contribution. Before I could respond, he guided me toward the kitchen, away from the guests. "Could you help your mother with the drinks?" he asked, clearly wanting to separate me from the conversation. In the kitchen, Mom busied herself arranging crackers on a tray, avoiding my eyes. "You should have called," she whispered. "We're in the middle of entertaining." "I texted this morning," I replied evenly. "You knew I might come by." "We didn't think you actually would." The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. I placed the orchid on the counter and leaned against the refrigerator, studying her. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you acting like I'm an inconvenient stranger rather than your daughter?" She sighed dramatically. "Not everything is about you, Brittany. We're trying to build relationships in our new neighborhood. Having you pop in unannounced complicates things. Complicates what exactly I'm confused about why my presence would be problematic. Before she could answer, we heard my father's voice rising from the living room as he continued his conversation. I moved closer to the doorway, listening. The housing market is challenging these days, he was saying authoritatively. We looked at dozens of properties before finding this one. When you know it's right, you just have to take the plunge. A male voice responded, "It must have been quite an investment in this neighborhood. The market's been crazy." There was a pause before my father said the words that would change everything. "Well, what's done is done. You bought it, but it's ours now." The room erupted in laughter, clearly taking his statement as a joke about homeownership and mortgage debt. But I stood frozen in the doorway, understanding the truth behind his words. In that moment, I saw my parents' actions with perfect clarity. They turned simultaneously, noticing me standing there, and I knew from their expressions that they realized I had heard. The laughter died away as the guests sensed the sudden tension. "Brittany," Dad said, attempting a light-hearted tone, "just joking around about the joys of homeownership. These folks understand the struggle." I stepped fully into the room, aware of all eyes on me. "Interesting joke considering I'm the one who bought this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom rushed in from the kitchen, face flushed. "Brittany is exaggerating. She helped with some of the paperwork since she's in real estate." One of the neighbors looked confused. "I thought you mentioned downsizing from your previous home to buy this place." "We did," Dad said, quickly shooting me a warning glance. "Brittany just means she helped facilitate the purchase." The deliberate lie struck me like a physical blow. I looked around the room at these strangers who had been misled about my parents and their new home. My home, technically. "I think I should go," I said quietly, fighting to maintain composure. "Sorry to interrupt your gathering." Mom followed me to the foyer, grabbing my arm. "We'll discuss this later," she hissed. "Don't make a scene." I gently removed her hand. "Yes, we absolutely will discuss this later." As I walked to my car, I heard the front door close behind me with a decisive click. Sitting in the driver's seat, I allowed the tears I'd been holding back to fall freely. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it left me breathless. My parents hadn't just excluded me from their celebration, they had actively erased my role in providing their home. I called James from the car, barely able to speak through my tears. "You were right," I managed to say. "It's worse than I thought." "I'll meet you at your place," he said immediately. "Don't drive if you're upset. Take a few minutes to breathe." Following his advice, I sat in my parked car for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The property deed might have my name on it, but in my parents' minds, they had claimed full ownership of not just the physical house, but the accomplishment of acquiring it. As I finally pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the house, the beautiful home I had sacrificed so much to provide. In the living room window, I could see the gathering continuing as if nothing had happened. My parents had already returned to their role as proud homeowners, the brief interruption of truth quickly contained and dismissed. I barely remember the drive to my apartment. The world passed in a blur as my mind replayed my father's words over and over. "You bought it, but it's ours now." Each repetition felt like another twist of a knife. By the time I arrived home, James was already waiting in the lobby of my building. One look at my face told him everything he needed to know. Inside my apartment, I collapsed on the sofa, the full weight of the betrayal finally hitting me. Between sobs, I recounted everything the gathering I'd interrupted, the lies about how they acquired the house, and most devastatingly, my father's revealing statement. James sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders, listening without interruption. When I finally fell silent, emotionally drained, he spoke carefully. "I'm so sorry they're treating you this way, Brittany. You deserve better, especially after such an incredible act of generosity." "I feel so stupid," I whispered. "I should have seen this coming. They've always taken advantage of my success, but I never thought they'd go this far." "You're not stupid for wanting to help your parents or for expecting basic gratitude in return. Their behavior says everything about them and nothing about you." The next few days passed in a fog of hurt and confusion. I threw myself into work, staying at the office until late each night, avoiding the emptiness of my apartment. and the thoughts that would consume me there. My parents called repeatedly, but I let each call go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear more excuses or manipulation. On Wednesday, I finally listened to their messages. Mom's voice was defensive and irritated. "Brittany, you overreacted on Sunday. We were just trying to fit in with our new neighbors. Call us back so we can explain." Dad's message was more demanding. "This silent treatment is childish. We need to discuss boundaries about showing up unannounced." Their complete lack of accountability only deepened my pain. There was no acknowledgement of their deception, no apology for excluding me, just frustration that I had disrupted their narrative. By Friday, I knew I needed professional help processing my feelings. I contacted a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and scheduled an emergency session for that afternoon. Dr. Natalie Foster listened attentively as I shared my history with my parents and the recent house situation. "What you're describing is a pattern of entitled behavior," she explained gently. "Your parents have come to see your generosity as an obligation rather than a gift. The house represented such an extraordinary act of giving that they couldn't reconcile it with their self-image without claiming it as their own achievement. But how could they so completely dismiss what I did for them? I postponed my own dreams to give them this security." Dr. Foster nodded sympathetically. For some parents, accepting that their child has surpassed them, especially financially, challenges their identity as providers and authorities. Instead of feeling pride, they feel diminished. Your success threatens the dynamic they're comfortable with, where they are the givers and you are the receiver. The session helped me contextualize my parents' behavior, though understanding didn't lessen the hurt. Dr. Foster suggested I take time to consider what boundaries I needed to establish going forward. "Generosity without boundaries often enables unhealthy dynamics," she advised. "You need to decide what kind of relationship you want with your parents and what conditions are necessary for that relationship to be healthy for you." After my therapy session, I met with a real estate attorney to understand my legal options regarding the house. As the property owner, I had the right to sell it or evict my parents, though the latter option seemed unthinkably harsh despite their behavior. "You have leverage here," the attorney explained. "A formal rental agreement, even with nominal rent, would clarify expectations and protect both parties." By the weekend, my parents' messages had shifted from defensive to concerned. "We haven't heard from you in days," Mom's latest voicemail said. "We're worried. Please call back." I recognized the pattern from previous conflicts: initial defensiveness, followed by concern that positioned them as the worried parents and me as the problematic child. My closest friends rallied around me with support. My college roommate Andrea texted daily check-ins, and my assistant Megan took on extra responsibilities at work without being asked. James remained a steady presence, bringing dinner to my apartment and simply sitting with me when I didn't feel like talking. During a Sunday brunch with Andrea, she asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What are you going to do about the house?" I pushed my untouched pancakes around my plate. "I don't know. Part of me wants to sell it just to prove a point, but I can't make my parents homeless." "That's because you're a good person unlike them," she said bluntly. Andrea had witnessed my parents' behavior for years and never hesitated to call it out. "But being good doesn't mean being a doormat. You need to establish consequences." Her words echoed what Dr. Foster had suggested about boundaries. I realized I had spent years enabling my parents' entitled attitude by continuing to give despite their lack of genuine appreciation. The house was simply the most extreme example of a long-established pattern. That evening, after a week of silence, I finally called my parents. Dad answered immediately, his tone cautiously neutral. "Brittany, we were getting worried." "I needed time to think," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk about what happened and about the house situation going forward." "Your mother and I agree. We should clear the air. Would you like to come over tomorrow?" "No," I said firmly. "I'd prefer to meet on neutral ground. There's a restaurant I'll make reservations at. I'll text you the details." His immediate agreement told me they were concerned about the potential consequences of their actions. For perhaps the first time, they recognized that their behavior might have actual repercussions beyond temporary discomfort. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, mentally preparing for the conversation ahead. I was done being manipulated, done having my generosity taken for granted. Tomorrow would mark a turning point in our relationship, one way or another. I just hoped there would still be a relationship to salvage when the dust settled. The restaurant I chose was upscale without being intimidating with private booths that would allow for a discreet conversation. I arrived 15 minutes early, settling my nerves with deep breaths and reviewing the talking points I had prepared. This was perhaps the most important conversation I would ever have with my parents, and I was determined to remain calm and focused. They arrived precisely on time, both looking uncharacteristically subdued. Mom had dressed carefully in her church clothes, while Dad wore a collared shirt I had given him last Christmas. Their effort to present themselves well suggested they understood the seriousness of the situation. After brief, awkward greetings, we ordered drinks and appetizers. Once the server left, an uncomfortable silence descended. I waited, giving them an opportunity to initiate the conversation, to perhaps offer an apology without prompting. Instead, they exchanged glances, clearly expecting me to begin. "I've had time to think about what happened last Sunday," I finally said, keeping my voice low and controlled. "And about the housewarming party I wasn't invited to. I need to understand why you've been presenting the house as something you purchased yourselves, and why you've excluded me from celebrating your new home." Dad cleared his throat. "We appreciate everything you've done, Brittany. Perhaps we got carried away with wanting to impress the neighbors. It wasn't meant to hurt you." "We were trying to establish ourselves in the community," Mom added. "It's difficult moving to a new neighborhood at our age. We didn't want to be seen as charity cases." I took a sip of water, considering their responses. "I understand the desire to be respected by your new neighbors, but there's a difference between downplaying my assistance and actively lying about it, between wanting your own housewarming party and deliberately excluding me from any celebration." "We should have included you," Mom conceded, though her tone lacked genuine remorse. "That was thoughtless." "It was more than thoughtless," I said quietly. "It was a deliberate choice that revealed how you view my role in providing your home. Dad's comment made that abundantly clear. You bought it, but it's ours now." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "That was just a joke, Brittany. You're taking it out of context." "The context was you presenting yourselves as the homeowners who purchased the property with no acknowledgement of my contribution. It wasn't a joke. It was the truth about how you see the situation." The server returned with our drinks and appetizers, creating a brief respite from the tension. Once we were alone again, I continued. "I've spoken with both a therapist and a real estate attorney this week," I said, noting how they both straightened at the mention of an attorney. "I've come to some decisions about how we move forward from here." Mom reached for Dad's hand, her expression anxious. "What does that mean? Are you planning to do something with the house?" "That depends on you," I replied evenly. "I see two possible paths forward." I unfolded a sheet of paper and placed it on the table. Option 1. You acknowledge to friends, family, and neighbors that I purchased the house for you. You express genuine appreciation for this gift, rather than embarrassment or entitlement. And we formalize our arrangement with a proper rental agreement that includes a symbolic rent of $1 per month, simply to establish legal clarity about ownership and responsibilities. Dad frowned. And option 2. You find a new place to live within 60 days. Their expressions transformed from concern to shock. Mom's hand flew to her chest in a gesture that once would have triggered immediate guilt in me. Now I recognized it as a practiced response designed to elicit exactly that reaction. "You would throw your own parents out on the street?" she asked, voice trembling. "After everything we've done for you?" I maintained eye contact, refusing to be manipulated. "I would expect my parents to treat me with basic respect and honesty. I would expect them to acknowledge my generosity rather than erase it. And I would expect them to understand that actions have consequences, especially actions that deliberately hurt others." "You're overreacting," Dad began, but stopped when I raised my hand. "This isn't an overreaction. This is the natural conclusion of a pattern that's existed our entire relationship. You've always taken my help for granted, always expected more while giving less in return. The house was meant to provide you security, not to be a tool for enhancing your social status at my expense." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We never meant to hurt you. We just wanted to feel like this was really our home, not something hanging over our heads." "It was always meant to be your home," I said softly. "That's why I bought it for you." "But ownership comes with responsibility. including the responsibility to honor the truth about how you acquired it. Dad leaned forward, his expression serious. What exactly would this rental agreement entail? We'd be tenants in our own home. You'd be tenants in my property, I corrected gently. The agreement would outline maintenance responsibilities, establish that major repairs remain my obligation as the owner, and protect both our interests. The dollar rent is purely symbolic, not financial. They exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations long married couples perfect over the years. Finally, Dad nodded slowly. We'll accept option 1. We'll correct the misconceptions with the neighbors and sign your agreement. And we're sorry, Mom added, though the apology felt more strategic than heartfelt. We should have included you in the housewarming party. That was wrong. I sensed they were saying what they thought I wanted to hear rather than genuinely understanding the impact of their actions. But it was a start, a foundation to build upon. Thank you, I said. There's one more thing. I've arranged for a property management company to handle any issues with the house going forward. If something needs repair or attention, you'll contact them rather than me directly. This addition clearly surprised them. Dad's brow furrowed. That seems unnecessary. We can just call you like we always have. This creates a professional buffer that will be healthier for our relationship, I explained. It separates our personal connection from property matters. They didn't like it, that was obvious, but they reluctantly agreed. As our entrees arrived, the conversation shifted to safer topics, the most difficult part of the discussion behind us. Before we parted, I took a moment to express something important. I need you both to understand something. I bought you this house because I love you and wanted you to have security, but love doesn't mean allowing myself to be disrespected or taken for granted. Moving forward, our relationship needs to be based on mutual respect and honesty. Mom's eyes welled with tears again, but this time they seemed more genuine. We do love you, Brittany. We're proud of you. Sometimes it's just hard to accept that our daughter has become so successful while we've struggled. Your success is something to celebrate, not resent, I said gently. I hope someday you can truly see it that way. As we said goodbye in the parking lot, their hugs felt stiff and uncertain. I knew we had a long road ahead to rebuild trust and establish healthier patterns. But for the first time, I had advocated for myself rather than capitulating to avoid conflict. I drove home feeling both drained and strangely empowered, uncertain about our future relationship, but confident in my decision to protect my own well-being. 3 months after our confrontation at the restaurant, I stood in the center of my newly purchased condominium, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and yes, my parents. The space was filled with conversation and laughter as people explored the industrial-style loft with its exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland. The path to this moment had been complicated. After our discussion, my parents had indeed corrected the misconceptions about the house with neighbors and family. According to my Aunt Judy, who called to apologize for her own assumptions, Mom had been tearful but forthright when explaining that I had purchased the home for them. Dad had been more matter-of-fact but clear about acknowledging my generosity. The rental agreement had been signed without further dispute, and the property management arrangement was functioning as intended. There had been 2 minor maintenance issues that were handled professionally without my direct involvement, creating exactly the buffer I had hoped for between my role as daughter and my position as property owner. My parents' behavior had improved, though I sensed the improvement was more about compliance than genuine change in perspective. They were polite during our weekly phone calls and the occasional dinner, but an undercurrent of resentment remained. They were following the letter of our agreement while still struggling with its spirit. Dr. Foster, who I continued to see regularly, assured me this was normal. Real change in long-standing family dynamics takes time, she explained. They're in the uncomfortable position of having to reconstruct their identity as parents and their relationship with you. That's significant work. In the meantime, I focused on my own growth. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about setting boundaries and recognizing manipulative behavior. I had become more discerning about when and how I offered help to others, ensuring my generosity came from a healthy place rather than obligation or guilt. Now hosting my own housewarming party for the condo I had finally purchased for myself, I felt a sense of completion. This home represented my recommitment to my own dreams after years of prioritizing others' needs. James appeared at my side offering a glass of champagne. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly, nodding toward my parents who were engaged in conversation with some of my colleagues across the room. "I'm good," I replied, surprised to realize it was true. "They're actually being respectful. Dad even complimented the building's architecture without suggesting how I could have gotten a better deal elsewhere." James smiled. Progress. Small but real. My parents approached a few minutes later, Mom carrying a small gift bag. "We wanted to give you this," she said, extending it toward me. "A proper housewarming present." Inside was a framed photograph of me as a child standing proudly in front of a cardboard house I had constructed in our backyard. The memory flooded back immediately. I was about 8 and had spent an entire Saturday creating an elaborate playhouse from discarded moving boxes. My parents had been genuinely delighted by my creativity, my dad even helping me cut out windows and a door. "You always did know how to make a house a home," Mom said softly. "Even back then." The gesture was unexpectedly touching, a rare acknowledgement of my lifelong drive and determination. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "This means a lot." As the party continued, I found myself in conversation with several other adult children who had experienced similar complications with financially supporting their parents. One woman had paid for her mother's medical bills only to have her criticize the choice of hospital. Another had contributed to his parents' retirement fund only to discover they had spent it on luxury cruises rather than securing their future. These conversations sparked an idea. 2 weeks later, I started a support group called Family Financial Boundaries. Initially just a monthly dinner with 5 others who understood the unique challenges of navigating financial assistance within family dynamics. Eventually, it grew into a formal organization with online resources and regular meetings across the city. Through this group, I connected with a broader network of people struggling with similar issues. I began offering workshops about setting healthy financial boundaries with family members, using my real estate expertise to advise on appropriate ways to help relatives with housing without creating unhealthy dependencies. My relationship with my parents continued to evolve gradually. There were setbacks, like when Dad complained to a mutual friend about the humiliating dollar rent arrangement, or when Mom subtly tried to guilt me about the property management system when a repair took longer than expected. Each time I calmly reinforced our boundaries, neither yielding nor escalating. 6 months after my housewarming party, I invited them to dinner at my condo. As we sat at my dining table overlooking the city lights, I noticed a shift in their demeanor. They seemed more at ease, less defensive. "The support group you started sounds really helpful," Mom commented. "Your cousin Melissa mentioned thinking of joining. Her daughter just moved back home after college and they're struggling with financial boundaries." I was surprised by her positive reference to boundary setting. "It's been rewarding to create a space for those conversations. They're difficult but necessary." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "We didn't do a great job teaching you about money. You figured it all out on your own." "I had to," I acknowledged. "But that shaped me into who I am today." "Someone stronger than we gave you credit for," he admitted, meeting my eyes directly. "We should have handled things differently with the house. I see that now." It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest acknowledgement of wrongdoing I'd ever heard from him. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. "Thank you for saying that." Our relationship would never be perfect. My parents' entitlement and defensiveness were deeply ingrained behaviors unlikely to fully disappear. But we had found a way to coexist with clearer boundaries and greater honesty. I had learned that I could love them while still protecting myself from their harmful patterns. As I've shared my story with others through the support group, I've emphasized one crucial lesson: generosity doesn't guarantee gratitude or respect. Those must be earned separately and maintained through consistent behavior. And most importantly, helping family financially is valuable only when it strengthens rather than damages the relationship. The journey from hurt to healing wasn't linear or complete, but each step taught me more about standing firm in my own worth and refusing to enable behaviors that diminished me. The house I bought for my parents ultimately gave me an unexpected gift, the strength to build boundaries as solid as any foundation. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took your generosity for granted? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found this story helpful, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential for healthy relationships. Thank you for listening, and I hope my story helps you navigate your own family challenges with courage and clarity.